The secret of Custer's final stand is revealed by Red Bear's eyewitness account. Red Bear, an experienced scout, relives the most dramatic scenes of the Battle of Little Bighorn in an exhilarating account. He vividly and unvarnishedly depicts the flurry of gunfire, flying arrows, and war cries that characterize this momentous battle between two cultures. Red Bear, a warrior who served with Custer's 7th Cavalry, offers a singular and uncommon perspective on the cultural conflict that shaped the American frontier. His compelling account transports you to the center of the conflict when a country's fate was on the line. So take a seat back and let's explore this fascinating tale together. Remember to support our community by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Custer had given the command for the charge and told the scouts to take the Dakota horses out of their camp. When Red Bear arrived at the lone teepee, the other scouts were already circling it and whipping it. The scouts had charged down the dry run. They stopped for around 30 minutes at the lodge after he joined them. "There's plenty of provisions here," said one of the scouts. A feather entered the tent, sampled the soup prepared for a Dakota warrior who had died, and nibbled on some of the meat. Custer and Fred Gerard suddenly showed there, and he yelled, "You were supposed to move straight into the Sioux village." Custer, who had overtaken his warriors, caught up to them as they were inspecting the teepee and reprimanded them verbally and physically, stating, "I told you to charge ahead, not linger. I have not been obeyed. Allow the soldiers to lead the charge and move aside. If any man among you lacks courage, I'll take his weapons and declare him a woman," Custer said. One scout retorted, "Tell him that it will take him a very long time if he does the same to his white soldiers who are less brave than we are." With a laugh, the scouts indicated that they were prepared for combat. They advanced, but Red Bear saw that Custer and his men swerved to the right about 50 yards beyond the lone tent. With the help of the young hawk, goose, black fox, red star, bloody knife, two strikes, little Sioux, bob-tailed bull, forked horn, red silly bear, kid chief, tiny brave, and one feather, Gerard proceeded with the scouts. As they crossed the river, they got closer to the Dakota camp. After riding hard and dashing down to the tiny large horn, they crossed and then parted ways once more. The Dakota horses were grazing close to the timber when 6 scouts made a fast right turn. Strikes 2, Black Fox, Small Sioux, and One Feather trailed behind the boy chief and Red Star. The gang led by Bloody Knife moved in on the point of the Dakota camp. 3 horses with a bloody knife returned far ahead, and someone yelled, "Take these horses back to the hill." "I have one for myself." Because of the dust, Red Bear missed the bloody knife, but he subsequently found out who it was. Bloody Knife, a young hawk, a goose, a forked horn, a tiny brave, a red bear, a bob-tailed bull, and 2 crow scouts made up this gang. At the point of the Sioux camp, they came together and started shooting with their carbines. They got off the horse and started shooting. Fire was returned by the Dakotas, who were hidden on the hills or bluffs. There was nobody on horseback then. From less than a quarter of a mile distant, they were firing. A forked horn sounded at the edge of the timber. Approach this method. The soldiers caught up to them as they crossed the ford toward the Dakota village. To Red Bear's right, men were forming a line across the river as they shifted further to the left. There was turmoil and mayhem everywhere. He couldn't identify any white officers or soldiers. The men had not yet dismounted and were already with the scouts when Bloody Knife yelled about the horses. The Red Bear mounted and rode in his direction as the forked horn sounded. Red Bear saw a Dakota horse hit in the neck or face as it got closer to the line where the young horse was as he dismounted and approached forked horn. "I strike an enemy's horse," said young Hawk as he struck the horse. The white troops were yelling and yelling. After that, young Hawk galloped up to Red Bear and declared, "Uncle, I hit the bay horse, and it's mine. I hand it to you. You're holding a rope. The horse is yours to keep." Then Red Bear said, "What's the point? We are currently engaged in combat, and I could lose my life. It won't be useful to me." Then young Hawk rode back to his place. Little Brave came out of the woods at that precise moment and said he had heard the Dakotas in their camp getting ready to charge. "Since they outnumber us," he added, "let me shoot the camp once before we withdraw to the hill." Red Bear held his horse as Little Brave dismounted to face the fire. Shortly after, Little Brave came back to warn Red Bear that the Dakotas were going to charge and suggested that they get on horseback and go back to the timber before crossing the river. They encountered fire from an ambush just over the Little Bighorn as they rode through the bushes in the direction of the river. The Dakotas were firing from the ground while concealed in the undergrowth. The scouts went back to their starting point. Between the ridge and the river, they spotted a huge group of Dakota horsemen riding forward while yelling and shooting as they headed toward the river. They were crowding the area. When the Dakotas started shooting, he led his horse, but the animal was stopped when a bending tree struck his saddle horn. He pulled at the horse's head repeatedly until it eventually moved forward, but he lost his additional cartridges when the saddle girth broke. He made 2 attempts to climb, but his canteen caught under him, causing him to fall. Little Brave had not dismounted and was far ahead when he finally managed to saddle and pursue him. As he emerged from the woods, he could no longer see Little Brave, but could make out a figure riding ahead, just discernible through the dust and smoke. 10 soldiers on horseback were then he observed fleeing in the direction of the woods. Suddenly he heard the soldiers shouting as their horses stumbled due to a serious cut. He left the battling men behind and turned his horse to the left, avoiding the cut. He kept going after Little Brave until the shadowy figure in front of him veered to the left. He continued riding straight beyond the spot where the rider had turned left, believing it couldn't be Little Brave. Red Bear was thrown off as his horse faltered and fell. Red Bear followed the horse as it ran toward the river. A long, dry limb became tangled in the bridle and pulled behind the horse, causing it to come to a stop in this open space with many of rose bushes and few trees. Red Bear managed to catch up, but he had trouble controlling the frightened horse, which jumped all over the place. He was still holding his carbine in his right hand, so he was just using his left. Abruptly, he noticed a painted Dakota warrior galloping upstream on his right toward him. The warrior's face was painted yellow above and red below, with yellow paint also applied to his eyes and forehead. When the Dakota fell from his horse, Red Bear shot him. The horse wheeled back, reared up, and ran away. Red Bear could now only hear the Dakota's shrill whistles and the constant firing of carbines. He noticed his horse swimming across the river after following it. Together, they crossed the river after he jumped into the water, swam to the horse, and grabbed it by the mane. He spotted the Dakota horse he had shot swimming behind him as he came up out of the water. The dark bay horse swam with a ring of deer hooves around its neck that rattled and a white streak across its forehead. A few distance upstream from him, this horse crossed the river. He noticed a young hero who had already crossed and was bleeding profusely from wounds beneath his right shoulder. Not upstream toward Red Bear, but gently trotting toward the ridge, was Little Brave's horse. Red Bear was going to drive the Dakota horse toward Little Brave, so he walked over to where it had crossed. Bob-tailed Bull's horse appeared suddenly downstream through the bushes to his left, its mane and tail swaying in the wind, its rope and reins flying. Red Bear was only a few yards away when the frightened horse snorted past him. He noticed that the front of the saddle was smeared in blood. The Dakotas were firing down at them from the hills above, and Little Brave was still riding slowly when he waved his hand at Red Bear to be careful. Red Bear took Little Brave's gesture as a request to catch one of the horses for him because his own was tired. So he dismounted and grabbed a rope trailing from one of the 2 horses, either the Dakota horse or Bob-tailed Bull's. 5 or 6 white soldiers emerged from the bushes after crossing the river, and Bob-tailed Bull's horse followed them. As darkness fell, they heard 3 shots fired ahead of the herd, alarming the scouts. They quickly surrounded the herd and rode forward, reaching the Rosebud Valley in the darkness. After hearing the gunfire, the 2 scouts who had been in the lead retreated and joined the herd, determining that the Dakotas were getting close and that they had to flee. They rode forward after choosing new horses. The Dakotas were pursuing them as the surviving scouts drove the herd from behind and noticed a cloud of dust and dirt flying from the trail behind them. Exhausted and thirsty, they also mounted new horses and galloped around the herd until they came to a black line of timber in front of them. One scout rode ahead to locate a muddy water hole over a cut bank, but they stopped at the edge of the timber. When the others heard the scout shout, they led their horses over the bluff and slid down to the water hole. As the hole filled with water, each scout used their hands to construct a temporary drinking area and drank from it. Unfortunately, the horses didn't have enough water. Hall Buffalo said he knew the way out as they slept and chatted, and they followed him till midnight when they arrived at the Rosebud River. They arrived at daybreak and proceeded to the modern-day Cheyenne Agency. They then ascended a high peak and came to a stop, looking down at the Dakota's Sundance site. The Dakota scouts suggested that they remain still for the day so that they could survey their surroundings from every angle. They spent the day resting with some scouts sleeping while others kept watch. At sundown, they resumed their journey, riding through the night until they reached the camp where Bloody Knife had been drunk at dawn. The scouts scavenged for food among the camp remains and found meat and hardtack for breakfast. They crossed the Rosebud River at the same spot as before and discovered that Stabb's scout party had already crossed ahead of them in haste, recognizing their tracks from Stabb's mule. Following the Rosebud to its mouth, they arrived at the old camp and last parade ground, discovering cooking cans and other signs of a recent campfire. They concluded that this was the party's breakfast camp, and since it was now close to noon, they moved down the Rosebud's bank to discover boxes of partially spoiled hardtacks, which they loaded onto their saddles and continued traveling. The party led by Strikes mistook Red Bear's group for Dakota Indians and accelerated their pace, vanishing from view. Red Bear's party moved slowly along the old Custer Trail until they approached the Tongue River, at which point they camped in the timber on top of a ridge. Been fatally beaten. The commander, wearing the white hat, led a wagon train, a company of infantry, and Strikes to his party from Fort Buford when they arrived at the Powder River camp. The officer received information of the combat from the scouts via translators, the Santee, Half-Breed Dakota, and Crow Bear, Grove Entra. The best two were chosen for Foolish Bear and White Cloud to deliver messages to the officer who had ridden up the Elk River after he assembled the scouts and told them to bring in their horses, a steamboat to the mouth of the Bighorn River. The two scouts pulled a tiny raft with their carbines and a message bag while they swam their horses across the Elk or Yellowstone River. After a few days, they rode to the mouth of the Bighorn, where they called Strikes to a bull in the water so they could cross and deliver the message to Fort Buford. Then White Cloud and Foolish Bear crossed the river again and joined the other scouts. Red Bear assumed that all of the soldiers had been slain and never saw Little Brave again. I hope this first-hand story helps you better comprehend the 1876 Great Sioux War and the Battle of Little Bighorn. Watch this space for additional videos in which we go deeper into first-person narratives of various conflicts. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you later.